Hello my lovelies. I said in the last video that I was going to do something completely different today, but I lied, and I felt like I had to come back and revisit the topic of subject terminology. I was going to avoid it because I don't want to get into a debate about what kind of subject terminology you might be writing about on question 2 and 3 of paper 1 for AQA English GCSE. But I think it's become a bit of an obsession that certain terms are worth more marks, which is not true, and I wanted to clarify that before we go any further. So I just wanted to explain how we mark subject terminology, the kind of subject terminology that might be helpful, and then have a quick look at an exam response where subject terminology has been used to show you how that applies in real life. So on the mark scheme for paper 1, for question 2 and question 3, you'll see these features. So it says subject terminology, simple, some appropriate terminology, clear and accurate terminology, or sophisticated and accurate. And I think this has led us down a dead end because there's a kind of implied hierarchy that doesn't exist in real life. So for instance, we would think if you use the subject term, the word, that will be simple. And if you used the subject terminology pre-modifying adjective, that would be sophisticated. But in real life, it's not like that. And as soon as I see subject terminology, all I think is, oh, there's some subject terminology. And that could help me be a level 1 or it could help me be a level 4. Because subject terminology is not the thing that helps a marker fix a mark. It's not what's helping me decide whether you're a 1 or you're an 8. What's helping me decide whether you're a 1 or you're 8 is your quality of comment, which is why I put that in the first column. And that carries the majority of the weight for the decision I'm making. So when I look at a comment, I think, is this simple? Is this an attempted comment? Is it explaining clearly what the language means, or is it analysing the language? And that's what helps me decide whether I'm going to put you in level 1 or level 4. But subject terminology is just a kind of a minor choice I might be making to help me refine a mark within that level. So when I see the word, well, that could be level 1 or it could be level 4. When I see pre-modifying adjective, that could be level 1 or could be level 4. It just depends on the way that the comment on the language has been used. So what I'm trying to say is that subject terminology is completely meaningless in helping fix a grade, because I've got to consider the comment first. I've got to consider the comment first, and that carries the majority of the weight. So with those words, simple and sophisticated and accurate and everything in between, we're now going to have a look at some things. These I have just taken today off Wikipedia, that great reference text, but I could equally have pulled them out of my dictionary of literary terms. My dictionary of literary terms, by the way, I think it must run at 500 pages. I think there must be at least 300 different terms in there that date back to the ancient Greeks and the Romans. Some of these, I have no clue what they mean. I would have to look them up. So if I'm reading something and it says there's a transferred epithet, I'd actually have to look up what that meant. And I think most English teachers would admit to being in the exact same boat unless they had done loads and loads of Latin and Greek. And then there are other things in there that mean the same. So, for instance, or mean kind of the same, or loosely the same, hyperbole and exaggeration. And there's no priority. If you use the word hyperbole, it doesn't mean you're a level 4, just as using the word exaggeration doesn't mean you're a level 2. So there's no priority. It's whether or not it's accurately used. Now, I would argue, and other English teachers be happy to agree or disagree, that hyperbole is a rhetorical device. Therefore, it's used persuasively. Therefore, you wouldn't find it in descriptive writing in a story because the purpose is different. The purpose is to entertain. So for me, hyperbole, as an example, rests on purpose, whereas exaggeration doesn't. It's just a wider category. Now, that is important when we're thinking about clear and accurate use of subject terminology, because some of these more complicated terms like litotes, for example, or some of the more complicated things further down the list, are very, very, very precise and are used only in certain situations where certain combinations of words are used in a particular way. And it's very, very easy to get them wrong. Now then, I might argue, and this is not how we mark, I've already said, it doesn't matter if you're putting onomatopoeia, level 1, level 4, could be anywhere in that range of 1 to 8 marks. But if you don't use it correctly, then I have to ask the question, is this clear and accurate, which is level 3. So if you aren't using it right, and it's not correctly used, then I have to think to myself, do you really understand, do you really have a clear understanding of language? So it would be much better in that case, I would argue, to use something simple that you feel confident saying that this is this, and sticking to the simplest terms, because, for instance, if you say the word, nobody can say that that's not a word if it's a word. But if you say the use of hyperbole, and it's not hyperbole, then I have to kind of say, okay, well, it really is this going to stop at the top of level 2? And then with these complex terms, because this happens as well, people get them wrong. And then I have to think, do they really have a clear understanding for level 3? Can I give them 5 or above? So I think there are things in here that are much more simple. Words. People are so afraid of using the word, to describe language, but I've read level 4 answers that have used that extensively, or said the writer describes, or simple, that might be the extent of their subject terminology, but their comments are just absolute pure gold. And then on the flip side, I've read a lot of level 1 responses that might be misidentifying a lot of these terms, or even identifying them correctly, but it doesn't make any difference. My one bugbear, by the way, is synesthesia, because I come from a psychology background as well as an English background, and synesthesia to me is a term from psychology. It's a psychological condition, and if you look at the history of the word synesthesia and how it's been used in literary criticism, it came over, I think, in the 1950s, and English critics in Cambridge, Oxford, so academics, were very critical of its use. Didn't like how American writers were using it to talk about the poetry of Jared Manley Hopkins, for example, to talk about how he blends two senses, or how he picks a word from one sense and ties it in with another. And I think now it's kind of just a general catch-all term for sensory language, which is ridiculous. That's not what this term means in literary criticism. It's certainly not what it means in the majority of the world, because it's a psychological condition. And so it would have been much more appropriate for candidates to write, the writer uses sensory language when describing the smell of something, rather than saying the writer uses synesthesia, because I would argue it's not actually correct use of that term. And also I'm a little bit snobbish, and I think that this word should be used properly. So what I'm trying to say is, when I come across terms like the word, the writer describes, it's no more helpful than seeing pre-modifying adjective or any other more complex term. It just, all I'm doing in my examiner head is going, here's some subject terminology. That's good, and I might give it a little tick, but then I'm looking for the comments, because the comments are the thing that's helping me mark. And the other thing, as you can see with the word describes, is you can use it in a much more creative way. For instance, many people who go this feature spotting, identifying subject terminology route tend to use things as nouns all the time, like the writer uses a simile, the writer uses some hyperbole, the writer uses some exaggeration. And we tend to use them a lot as nouns. But what I do notice, and this is not anything that's going to help me fix a mark, but candidates who clearly understand how a writer is using language actually use different things than the noun of the subject term. So they might say the noun, the writer uses some description. They could equally use a verb, the writer describes. They could use an adjective, the writer uses descriptive language, or they could use an adverb, the writer uses words descriptively. And that to me shows, I think, a more clear understanding of these terms, and actually much more simple and much more effective. So just having a look at how this fits with a text. This is taken from Laurie Lee's Cider with Rosie, which wouldn't come up on an exam paper because it's autobiography. But I've just picked out some words that I could talk about. So, a tropic heat oozed up from the ground, rank with sharp odours of roots and nettles. Right, what is this word oozed? Some people are going to say it's onomatopoeia, and I've seen people talk about this word as if it's onomatopoeia. Is it? Is our ooze the sound that something oozing makes? Because I don't know that that's the sound that it doesn't go ooze. Not in the same words that something falling in a pond would go plop. So, is it? Would it be better to say the verb? Because the verb is right, it is a verb. Otherwise, onomatopoeia, I'm not sold on whether it's onomatopoeia or not. And the same with other terms that people will easily pick up on are things like alliteration, where we see in fumes and flakes. Alliteration is one of those subject terms that I think is a big dead end and really hard to talk about accurately in English language. I think it's nice to talk about in poetry, and I talk often on my poetry blogs about the effect of alliteration on all the sounds of language. And I've no doubt that Laurie Lee intended some effect with these sounds. But what is that effect of all of these f's? I mean, it's kind of an airy sound, so if I wanted to, I could kind of get into it. But alliteration, sibilants tend to be a bit of a dead end in terms of subject terminology. And I'd rather go for something more simple like oozed. I could also pick up on this word screaming. Now, a lot of people are going to say that these words ending in ing are present participles, which may be true, but they can be used in different ways. Like, is this used as a verb? Is it used to describe? Is it, what is it doing? And that also becomes complicated as well. And then finally, people are avoiding things like similes, as though the sky were tearing apart, as if it's some kind of level 1, put it on the reject pile of subject terminology. So here are some examples, and I'll tell you, we've got 2 examples here. So the writer uses the active present participle screaming. So I'm kind of going, is it? Okay, or maybe. To convey the fact that the birds are very noisy. Alright, so what have we got? We have got a simple comment. You see where I'm going? I'm looking at the quality of the comment. I don't care about that active present participle flashy language. I'm looking at the quality of the comment to convey the fact that the birds are very noisy. Okay, screaming, yes, very noisy. So I'm going, okay, simple comment. That's an exact rewriting of what screaming means. And the fact that they've said and correctly identified the active present participle doesn't mean this is a level 4 any more than it means it's a level 1. And because this comment is simple, it's fixed it at level 1. There we are. So I've got a choice of 1 or 2 marks. That's all I'm going to give it out of 8 for that kind of response in an answer. Now, an answer may do that 60 times and identify all of the features correctly, and it's still 1 or 2 marks. Now, the next example, the writer describes the larks as screaming to show how terrifying they are to the boy. So first I say to myself, is that true? This comment, and I go, yes, they are terrifying to the boy. That's exactly the effect he wanted to convey. Their calls exaggerated in the boy's mind. Yes, they are, because larks' calls, their song, is not unpleasant, and he's making it unpleasant. And they are no longer joyful or singing as you might expect of a bird. Okay, some more helpful explanation of a comment, but exaggerated to nightmarish proportions. Now, that's true. It's exaggerated, it's nightmarish, it's all true. So that, at least at its very minimum, will be a clear comment. Now, if you look at the subject terminology here, describes, we've got some exaggeration because they are exaggerated. Is it hyperbole? I don't know. Is he doing it for a rhetorical effect? I don't know. But it is exaggeration, so exaggeration is right. And that's the extent. So that's the thing that's helping me decide whether something is a level 1 or a level 3 or above, is whether or not the comment is good, not whether you use some fancy flashy subject terminology. So I hope that really clarifies something for you today about subject terminology and what that all means.